Okay, this is another portfolio critique from a gentleman named Pedro who reached out to me from the Facebook page about drawing comics and asked me to look at some of his work and give some feedback for him. So here we go. Again, this is just my opinions on things that I think he can work on, and everybody's obviously opinions are different, but I hope this is helpful. So this first page, I should mention, so what Pedro did was he pointed me to his, I believe, his Facebook page and said, here are examples of my work. These are not, these are 4 separate pages from 4 separate stories. There's no continuity to them. So that made it a little harder, whereas some of the other folks, they gave me specific pages to say, here, here are the ones I want you to look at. That's a little better, just in general moving forward, if anybody sees this, because I'm looking at what you want me to look at as opposed to picking, maybe what I'm going to look at. So anyway, here we go. So the first one, we've got these birds coming across, obviously storks carrying babies. I get it. No problem. Here we have some stuff breaking the panel, but not breaking the panel, right? The panel's going through these things, which doesn't work. I get this is shading here, but if you're going to break a panel, it needs to be important. Having that little tidbit break it versus having it not break it really doesn't change the image, right? If you're going to do it, you need to have a lot more of that bird off the panel because it needs to be important. The other part is you can't have some part of it break a panel, excuse me, and then not other parts, right? So this is a baby here. Why doesn't, so this panel's solid and this panel isn't, so it doesn't make a lot of sense there. So that's what I would fix there. The other thing you could do as well, we know there's storks and they're flying, but they still fly somewhere. It wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe have some clouds, just to add depth. Without the overlapping, there's nothing overlaps one another here on this entire page. So it's harder for your eye to read that this is closer and this is further. There are some things. This has more detail, this has less detail, that's good. The size, obviously. But once you begin to overlap things, that helps to create a sense of depth. And so that's really what this is missing here. This is a map, right? So he's drawn the area. I'm assuming that's what it really looks like. That's fine. If you're going to do the little compass, again, you have a lot of space here. The only lettering is here. This could certainly be bigger, right? Kind of fill up some of this room and do south, east, do the whole thing. Or the other option is you have all this space. Why not make the map bigger? Make the land mass come all the way out here like this. You can still have your dot. You can have an arrow here. And I haven't changed where the lettering is at all, but I filled up the page. One of the most common things that I've seen with a lot of folks whose work I've been looking at as they're starting out, they don't realize that a comic book panel is valuable real estate, okay? You only have a certain number of panels per page per book. Think about it. So maximize it. Don't waste space. Unless you are drawing for someone else who's going to come in and add the dialogue later. Like obviously here, this is something he is writing and drawing himself. Use up that space. Don't leave blank spaces. It's too valuable to do that. Here he is, a little kid drawing on the wall. There's a hint of a family photo here, which is fine, except the family photo is not a whole lot more detailed than what the child is supposed to be drawing, I guess. So there are some things like making it three-dimensional on the frame could help to identify that. And as well, usually, even if you have a photograph underneath, a hint of a reflection tells you that there's glass on top. And the last thing is there's no, well, as I say, there's no light source. There's one bit of shading, which is right here on his leg. So that tells me that either the light is coming from this direction, right? So this is in shadow. Maybe it's coming from this direction or both. Either way, if the light is certainly coming from this direction, then I would want, even a photo that hangs on a wall has a slight drop shadow underneath it. And then more importantly, he is going to have a shadow. And right now, because there's no shadow, and as well, the line weight, I'll get to the line weight in a second. So there's no shadow. So he looks like he's flat against the wall when we know he's got his hand pressed against the wall. So you see, I have my hand pressed against a flat surface, but there's still shadow around my hand, and there's less shadow around the closer you are to that wall. So having a little bit of shadow, and then here, and then to this. And you don't have to shadow or shade in what the child is drawing, right? You don't have to black that out so it's not recognizable. You can shade around it is fine. But by doing something like this, it gives us, again, that depth that's missing. So now that child is standing in front of a wall as opposed to, I guess, being part of it or pressed against it. The other thing is the line weight. And that could go for pretty much most of the work, as you'll see through here, Pedro's work. But this line is as thick as this line, is as thick as this line. And so it's hard to tell what's what. So let me see here if I have a different pen I can use real quick. I would, especially if these are real thick. There we go. If the light is coming from this way, having this line be thicker to kind of emphasize where the shadow is wouldn't hurt, right? And again, all of a sudden, through just a couple of shade, a little bit of shading, he becomes a 3D object, whereas these become flat 2D objects on the wall. Okay. For the next panel here, he's drawn soldier saluting. Anatomy is numero uno. So the first thing I can tell you is that this is way too long, and I would guess that the reason is that it was drawn, the outside of the figure, the outline was drawn, and not a stick figure frame to start with. So what I mean by that is if I'm going to draw something like this, I'll start with the head and I go, okay, so the head's here and the eyes are here and the nose and the mouth, that's fine. And his neck's going to come down and his shoulders are here. Again, all that part, all good. Now what's going to happen is now I'm going to draw where is his arm going to come out. That is about as far as I would put his elbow. Right? You have your shoulder muscle, you have your bicep muscle, his arm is bent up, so it's going to be contracted. Now, this overlaps this part. So not only is it need to be closer in this way, right? The elbow closer, but it's also going to be on top so that the outside of your elbow is only going to be about here. and then his arm is going to come up, and then his hand is going to salute. Now, if you don't want that angle, then you have to bend this up higher to here, and you can do like this. But the point is, if I was to take this arm and kind of go like this, so from the shoulder to the outside of the elbow is this long. Okay. Now from the elbow to the fingertip is this long. See the difference? If you add those together, if I take this to this and this to this, I kind of put that like that, he has an arm that's that long. So from here to here, and you turn that upside down this way, right? His arm's off the bottom of the page. This dude would have huge monkey arms. So knowing how the structure underneath is supposed to work and your proportions, right? So that your arm is only as long as it needs to be. I had a doctor tell me this one time. When I was a kid, I broke the bones in this arm. Your forearm from wrist to elbow is the, go ahead, get the whole, from elbow to wrist. This right here, I know it sounds crazy. This is the exact same size as your foot. Take your shoe someday, put your shoe on your forearm. It's the exact same size. So even though it looks like it's really long and big, it's not as big as you think. So anyway, that would be there. Here, these guys in the back, again, could be a little bit, I get what they're doing, and it's a sort of symbolized, but it's messy. It's sort of sloppy. Give them a round head. Draw that little stick figure. Give them some shape, like it's a real human being. Take that extra time to give that detail. You have a flagpole, the flagpole comes behind, and then it disappears. Why doesn't the flagpole come all the way through there? And then lastly, we talked about empty real estate. So here's the real estate. What's going on in the back? Even just a simple horizon line behind everybody gives you some depth. And then you could do things, I'm assuming this is some sort of military, so you could do, okay, you could do a very simple box to make it a building, a barracks. A couple boxes in the back. A little, maybe a road. And now all of a sudden you have a scene and not just this image, right? You got the whole thing. Here you've got drawing materials on a page, kind of like with here. All these things are flat. They're all on top of each other, so they sort of blend together. They need some shadows. You could see even in the paper, like I've stacked up the pages that I'm going to be reviewing, and you can see this little line under here. There is a shadow even on pieces of paper that are lying on top of one another. So you just have to pick where the light source is coming from and give these things, especially the stuff on top of them, but give them just a little bit of shadow on each one. And it's really going to create that to be 3D as opposed to just a bunch of 2D shapes on top of each other. Okay. So that's that page there. Okay, now as I mentioned, these are not related pages. They don't go together to a story, so this is something completely different. So we've got the first one, nice use of an establishing shot. So you've used a good portion of the page to establish where we are in location. It looks like some sort of like I would say a Middle Eastern seaport is how I read this. And it looks pretty good. You've got some trees, got some buildings. This is a little tough. Be careful of perspective. Perspective is one of the most complex, kind of advanced pieces to think about. You've got the wall here in the front, which is cool. The port, people come in, but then like this these lines don't really mix. It's very flat. And part of that is because I think behind here, there is no real horizon. Now, even if you are in the desert, which is very, very flat, there is going to be a horizon line where, you know, when you look out, where's the world? The world typically isn't going to end here. Now, it has a very flat horizon, but again, even in a desert, if you decided to put in a horizon that's completely flat back here, like this, something like this, that's fine. It tells us as you go back past this place, there is desert. And then these things would all go back to it, right? Everything, you pick a point and everything goes back to that point, right? And that's how you get perspective, which is kind of what you're trying to do here. This goes up. This goes up like it's going back somewhere. But there's no true, it's not real perspective. Your other option is if you did want to drop and pretend the horizon line is down here, then that means everything, you'd almost be looking up at everything and everything would come down. All these lines would come, instead of going back in space and up, would be more like this, right? You're doing more of an upshot at everything if the horizon line is down here. So just being consistent with your perspective is going to help you out a lot. I know it's complex, it is complicated. You can sort of fudge it in small shots, but especially with a big establishing shot like that, kind of think about the perspective. Maybe go online. There's some resources that you can find that would help you out and kind of teach you more about that. Okay. The next one, we've got a figure, a shadowy figure. We've got a foot. Looks like it's kicking something in the marketplace of Bazaar. I like this right here, where here's in the foreground, this wall coming down that he's leaning on. You got the drop shadow, which is great. He's leaning on that wall. That's cool. Excuse me. And then behind him here is the less detailed Bazaar, and there's the overlapping that pushes that back. That's great. Line weight again. I would like to see these lines kind of blur together. It's a little bit difficult to see. Now, color would help, but you can't always expect color. So this I would like to see a little heavier. If that's right, he is really shadowed, like the light is on top of him. So that means this is all going to be pretty heavy shadowed, and that's going to help pop out that foot a little bit. Likewise, the little dish here that he's kicking, and it looks like there's like coins or something flying in the air. Those are kind of hard to see because, again, the lines all sort of blur together. Like this dish is almost the exact width of his foot, and so it sort of blends together. So you either need real heavy lines to pop it out or make the dish bigger. Here's what I would say. If I was going to completely redo this, personally, I would make this very large, very large. And what I mean is, like this foot would be like this big, and the robe maybe up in here, and this dish would be like this, and the coins coming out. And the reason I would do that is because this is the most important thing of this shot. This action of him kicking this dish, bowl, whatever, and the stuff coming out, that's the action. So make it pop out at people. This is part of the background. He's not moving, he's static. So make that what's really important. Here, now the guy's bending down to pick up stuff. Small detail, but over here, it looks like he has some sort of like wrap or boot. And then here you gave him toes. So just be consistent. He is very shadowed, and you've drawn a little bit of a shadow, but don't forget, like, even his arm is going to have a shadow. That's going to be there too. He's leaning out over his leg, so there's going to be a shadow like this. Don't shirk on the shadows. Likewise, this is a foot. It is not touching anything. It is just floating in air. By going like this, you establish that that foot is on the ground. Also, again, because there isn't always the same consistency, how do I know that this is not this? Or I'm assuming that this foot goes with this hand, goes with this guy, whereas this foot, is it somebody else? I don't know. This has a curled toe, this doesn't, but I'm not really sure. So maybe think about if it's not the same character, then do something different with this robe to identify that it's someone else, is kind of where I'm going there. Like lastly on this panel, you have the wall, you've established stuff. You have one little tent. Don't shirk out. Even like you did here, just that outline. You've already established that there's buildings back here that have. So make sure you draw it. If you're going to draw it in the background once, draw it in the background every time. Hand picking this up, I'd like to see bigger shadow. Again, it doesn't mean that there's the light's stronger or anything like that, but if your hand casts a shadow, your whole hand casts a shadow, right? It's not just a couple of fingers. I mean, you can see, like, especially he's coming down to pick something up. So as my hand comes down to pick up this pen, there's a lot of shadow there. So keep going with that. That's fine. And then you got this guy. He's holding that. You could beef up a little bit of these lines as well, just so that it helps to emphasize that this is closer. I don't know. I'm not sure if you're leaving room for dialogue or not. Maybe that's what you're doing. That's what you're not doing. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to drop in that wall, right? You've already established that there was a wall. The guy was sitting against the wall. Put the top of that little border. And then background just a little bit, keeps them in the same space. And then if you have a dialogue, bubble, if you have a word bubble and it covers up part of that, so what? But at least you've drawn it so that you can cover it up but still have what you need. And then this one here is fine. You've cut them off at kind of a weird angle or a weird spot where right across almost the eye line, whereas I understand his eyes are shadowed anyway. But if this was slightly up or his face was slightly more down, I mean, think about, like, I don't know if I need this much of his chin. So if you did this, I would do that so that I'll go like this. I would bring this darker, deeper, right? Have his eyes really shadowed. They're not just black holes, they're shadows. And then I would do more like this. And if you're going to go with a really heavy shadow, go for it. Something like that. And the space you get is by moving his head down a little bit, cutting off some of that beard. But when that border, the way it was, cut right across like the center of his eyes. So it was almost like you couldn't tell if he was looking. Just a weird place to cut him off. So that would be the change I would make there. All right, different page. Woman in an office setting. Now, just so you know, so far, these are good examples of different things that you can do. So that's really good. You've got that first one, which is kind of a montage story. Then you have this Middle Eastern bazaar, and now you have a woman in an office. So that's excellent. When you're talking to editors and things, if you're trying to get jobs, they're going to want to see some different type of stuff. So that's really, that's good as far as samples. Perspective. Obviously, this is, you've kind of faked it here. It's not really in true perspective. So that would be one where you'd want to kind of take the time and draw out a perspective grid. So this isn't going to be accurate, obviously, but like a perspective grid, when I'm talking about for something like that, you are doing, it looks like an upshot. So your horizon, it might be, you know, all the way at the bottom of the page, could be like that. And then here you're doing, everything's coming back to a center point. So say your point is here. So all your lines are going to radiate out from this point. And obviously you'd be doing it with a straight edge and all that. And you're making a grid out of this. So you're going to want to do, now you do straight vertical lines, and you do straight horizontal lines. And now what this does is, as you draw your buildings, you use these as your guides to say, okay, this building is going to be here like this and like this. And it can go back up. And I can come over and go down and do that. And I've got this one building in the middle. And then this one over here is going to be like this. And then, and that is how you get an accurate perspective. Okay, so you do the grid, do it light, obviously, and then you erase after. But this is something like that is going to help fix that. That's something that an editor would look at right away and be like, no, that's not right. Going on. Again, you've tried to, I keep talking about perspective, you've tried to sort of fake it here in the second panel by having these things go back, but like they don't, again, they're not in accurate perspective, and also the figure isn't in the same perspective. So what I mean is, like, if I was to take a straight edge and follow this down, and I'll just go all the way to here, and then this goes, this one goes all the way back to, say, there. That's, but this, and then the bottom, the bottom of the desk goes through here. The bottom of this, yeah, goes this way. So none of them meet up in the same vanishing point. The computer, right, goes like this, and then the bottom of the computer is, you've got it like parallel. So nothing is going right to the same point. If you want to do it in perspective, then you've got to have that vanishing point, like I showed you on the other one, so that it all goes back to one point. And maybe, you know, this point could be it, if that's what you want to do, but it just has to be consistent. That's all. Yeah, like, and then these, you know, just to, again, highlight, this one goes here, and then that is now parallel, whereas in real perspective, this would be going back to, say, this point, but then that means the top of it would be more like this, and then this one would be more like this, and then, because you're angling that way, right? So something to think about. The figure is good. Again, this might be the printout, but just don't forget that your shadows are sort of all around. And you can do line, you can do hatching if you want, or solid, doesn't matter, but it's not just in front. It's got to be sort of surrounding the figure. We cast shadow in all direction. And because you've established there's a pretty heavy light source coming, right? Because this is all shadow, this is all shadow. So the light source is coming this way. So again, I'm assuming this is some sort of a picture frame on a wall. I want that like that. If the light source is that way, then the desk has to have more of a shadow here as well. The trash can is going to be coming this way. And then just a little bit there, like that. It's fine, fine, fine. She is fine. That could be a little pointier. It's a small detail. I like her hair. I like the work you did in the folds of the shirt. It's very good. Okay. Here, so she's reading something on the computer. This is dead space. So if I take this and I cover this up, or if I take, I'm trying to find something solid to use as an example. I just use my hand. If I cover this up and you still see, does it change the panel? It doesn't. So this is dead space. So make the computer screen this big. Make her head bigger. And it draws in the reader's eyes better. The other thing that you have to think about, again, kind of an advanced idea, is pushing and pulling the reader. So your figure here is this big. This figure is this big. Notice I haven't moved my fingers. This figure is this big. Figure is this big. This figure is almost that big. Every figure that you've done in the panel, even whether it's bigger, the panel is bigger or smaller, you've zoomed in and cropped it, but she is essentially the same size from panel to panel to panel. You need some that are a real big close-up, some that are really small, some that are in the middle, and you need to